So in my chronological reread of Stephen King, I've just come to the end of the 1970s, which means it's a perfect time to rank his books from that decade. Hi everyone, I'm Dave Musson. I don't know what to say. Hi everyone, I'm Dave Musson, and this is the place where I talk to you about all things Stephen King. Now, as you know from the title and the intro, I'm going to be ranking Stephen King's books from the 1970s here based on my experience of doing my chronological reread, which I started back in April 2024 with the 50th anniversary of Carrie. So that's what we're going to get. It's going to be a spoiler-free ranking, just my personal ranking of the books in the 70s, and I'd love to hear your favourite King books from the 1970s. Got a few other things to throw into this special as well, which I'll get to in a moment, but first, a couple of very quick plugs. So first of all, you might have noticed my Randall Flagg t-shirt that kind of looks like the Nirvana logo. This was designed by me as part of my range of Stephen King themed band shirts where I mash up Stephen King stuff and famous band logos. If you want to check them out for yourself, the link is in the description. You can also find a link to my multi-award winning collection of short stories, short horror stories, Once More Around the Sun, which came out in 2024, all set in my own fictional version of my hometown, a story for every month of the year. Do check that out. And if you like what I'm doing here on this channel, you can become a member, you can become a constant viewer, get access to special members only content, cool emojis, early access to regular stuff, and get to support me directly. Again, link is in the description. So as I said, we're here today to rank the King books from the 70s based on my chronological reread experience. So I'm going to go through in reverse order based on the scores that I've given them in each of the videos that I've done rereading King's works from the 70s. What I'd also like to do here is compare that to where I rank those books in my overall ranking of Stephen King that I did back at the end of 2022. So how much of it will be the same, which books jump around, we'll find out at the end once I've gone through my ranking. And also as a bonus little ranking, you'll know if you've been following along with my chronological reread stuff that I like to give these books a score out of 19 on my Stephen King bingo card that I created a few years ago. 19 sort of tropes that come up time and time again in King books. So I thought it'd be fun to do a bit of a running score, a ranking for the 70s books on which ones score the highest on the Kingo card as well. So we'll do that at the end too. But anyway, enough preamble, let's get into this, a spoiler-free ranking of Stephen King's books from the 1970s. My least favourite to my most favourite. Let's go. So we've got 8 books to get through, and in 8th place, scoring 1.75 out of 5, is Rage from the Bachman books. Nowhere near as bad as I remembered it being, but comfortably the least good from the 70s. Still a lot to admire from it. The angst of the writing, you know, the compelling storyline, the Lord of the Flies influence on it. There were definitely stuff in there that I liked. I can totally see why King pulled it, and I cover in the episode his reflection on like the real life crimes that have been connected to this book. And it's definitely his weakest thing from the 70s. But I don't think it's his worst book. I think I'm going to come to worse books than that on this reread, for sure. So, yeah, 1.75 out of 5. Rage, coming in 8th place, my least favourite Stephen King book of the 1970s. So in 7th place is The Stand, which I gave 2 out of 5 to. Now, I'm kind of known on this channel for not being a particular fan of The Stand. The opening is pretty good, the ending is okay. So much of the middle is not, though. I think I actually enjoyed this reread of The Stand even less than my previous experiences of going through The Stand. Didn't help that I was parallel reading the original version as well, so I was really punishing myself. But just too much of it just bored me. And I think I wanted to see more of Vegas rebuilding society. Like, I wasn't really interested in seeing the good guys just trying to rebuild what they had before. I was much more curious to see the more interesting characters, Flagg and all of his cronies, seeing what they would do differently. And we get so little of Flag, it's kind of disappointing. And then you get a cool bit towards the end. Not going to say too much for spoilers, but then it gets boring again. Yeah, it's just not for me. So yeah, 2 out of 5, The Stand, 7th place. So in 6th place, scoring 3.75 out of 5, is The Long Walk, which is also in the Bachman books, the second Richard Bachman book. Now, there's so much to love about this book. I am staggered that King wrote this as a teenager, but it does explain why he's able to write those teenage boys so well. But it is just grueling. It is relentless. It is a really powerful, really interesting book. And rereading it has made me very excited for the movie that we're supposed to be getting later in 2025. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. Like, just a really harrowing and brilliant read. And again, written by a teenager, absolutely staggering. So in 5th place, this one scores the same as the book in 4th place, but I've just put this in 5th just because, well, there are a couple of dips in this one that just bring it down a little bit when comparing with the next one. I'm rambling. 5th place, 4 out of 5, Night Shift, King's first collection of short stories. Some absolutely incredible stories in here. You know, The Ledge I love, One for the Road. Sometimes They Come Back. Trucks, there's so many good ones in here. There are a couple of duffs, but it's a really solid collection all the way through. I think, memory serves me correctly, I gave a score for all of the stories out of 5, and I think the overall ranking came in at like 3.6, 3.7 out of 5. But I bumped it up to 4 because it's a really joyous experience reading this book. The stories are so tight, so punchy. These are all stories that he wrote for men's magazines when he was really having to work to a word count and to a deadline. And they're just great. They're just sort of classic Stephen King. A brilliant place to start your Stephen King journey if you've not yet read anything by him. Because they're all short, obviously, being short stories, and there's a good variety in here. We get things like The Woman in the Room and The Last Rung on the Ladder as well, which show his dramatic flair really early on too. But yeah, just a banging collection. 4 out of 5, 5th place, Night Shift. Right then, 4th place, also 4 out of 5, but slightly edging Night Shift out, it's Carrie. So I've really enjoyed going back to Carrie. I think Carrie actually held up better on reread than I remembered it being. Part of that, I think, was just the buzz of like reading it at the time when it was the 50th anniversary, but it was a joy to go back to this book. And King came out of the traps really well formed. Like, there's so much of this that is great, so much of it is scary. You can see him trying to do like the sci-fi thing with all the epistolary format, the reports and the committee extracts and stuff like that, which perhaps doesn't work as well as when he's just telling the story. But it's a great story. And for something so thin, like, it really does pack a punch. And as a starting point for his career, yeah, not much to find flaws with, I don't think. Okay, then we're getting into the top 3. And again, positions 3 and 2 have the same score out of 5. So I've had to sort of push myself to pick one over the other. So the one that I'm putting before the 3rd place in the 70s ranking with a score of 4.5 out of 5 is The Shining. A genuinely terrifying book. And going back rereading it, there was stuff in here that I'd forgotten about that were really scary. Or I'd forgotten quite how scary they were, like the wasp's nest, the hedge animals, the elevator moving around on its own. Just so good, and so much more depth to it than the Kubrick movie. I love the Kubrick movie, but it's almost completely a different entity to this book. This book is absolutely magical, absolutely terrifying, and yeah, just a great read, especially over the winter. Right in 2nd place then, also with 4.5 out of 5, is Salem's Lot, King's 2nd novel, but the one that really feels like where he properly got started. It's his first small town, obviously got vampires. It's a great propulsive story, brilliant autumnal read, some gorgeous writing, some great like moments in this where we have chapters going round the town and we sort of step away from our main characters for a bit, and some of those are some of his most compelling writing. It's just a wonderful novel. Yeah, had a great time going back to this. It's a shame that we then got the 2024 movie from last year, which does not do this book justice at all. But honestly, this novel is fantastic. And if you've never read a King novel before, I mentioned short stories might be a good place to start. But if you're looking for a novel to start with, this could be the one. So, of course, in first place, that means it's The Dead Zone, 5 out of 5, my all-time favourite Stephen King book. Yeah, it was always going to be top, wasn't it? I mean, I've literally just posted my video about this, but in short, I think it's a wonderful book, and it's King doing so much so early in his career. Drama, romance, hard-boiled crime, political thriller, horror, sci-fi, it's all here. And just the story of Johnny Smith is just so compelling. And the character of Greg Stilson, who is kind of Donald Trump before Donald Trump was a thing, utterly terrifying as well. It's quite episodic, it moves, gives you lots of different things to chew on, and I just love it, and I always will. So it's top of my ranking, 5 out of 5. My favourite book from Stephen King from the 1970s. And of all time. So then, let's compare that with how I ranked the books in the 70s in my overall ranking of Stephen King's works from a few years ago. So, in 8th place for the 70s, I had Rage, which is what I got this time. In 7th, I had The Stand, which is what I had this time. In 6th, I had Carrie, but I've got The Long Walk here. And then in 5th, I had The Long Walk. In 4th, I had Night Shift. And then the top 3 is the same, Shining, Sailor's Line, Dead Zone. So it's basically, it's exactly the same, apart from Carrie jumped up from 6th to 4th, which knocked down Night Shift and The Long Walk 1 position each. So yeah, I think part of that was definitely like rereading Carrie at the anniversary time, but genuinely, that is the one that I feel like, I just said it in the ranking, I feel like it came across better than I remembered. So yeah, that was interesting. So Carrie has climbed a couple of places in the overall ranking for me. But otherwise, it's pretty much as I had a couple of years ago. I wonder if the 80s will be different. We'll find out in quite a long time. So before we go, let's see the scores on the Stephen King bingo cards then. So this is to try and find the ones that have the most Stephen King tropes in there. So scores out of 19. Looking at this, Rage comes in last with 5.5 out of 19. And then The Long Walk was 6.5. That kind of makes sense because they're both Bachman books, I guess. Night Shift also I ranked at 6.5. I guess they're short stories, so there's less time to get those cliches out there. Then we jump to Carrie, 8.5. Makes sense, he's getting started. Then The Dead Zone, 10.5. Then The Stand, 11. Salem's Lot, 11.5. And The Shining so far is the most Stephen King-like book, according to my Stephen King bingo card, with 12.5 out of 19. And again, I wonder what sort of scores we're going to see in the 80s. I'm looking forward to jumping in and finding out. So there we go, there's my ranking of 1970s Stephen King based on my chronological reread experience. Let me know your favourite book from this decade by Stephen King and your least favourite as well. And, well, I guess we're now on to a new decade in the chronological reread. Is Firestarter next? It's going to be quite a while until we get to rank the 80s books, because at my current rate I'm doing my reread 1 book per month. So it's going to be well over a year until we get to the 80s. Or at least the end of the 80s, but stick with me because it's going to be a lot of fun. It's great going back and rereading these books. And well, I'll see you for the next one, Firestarter, very, very soon.